Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session titled Supporting Youth Transitioning from Child to Adult Services, a case example by Community Engaged Scholarship Institute at University of Guelph. This is hosted by Community-Based Research Canada. My name is Julia Coburn, and I'm the CBRC Program Coordinator, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. Community-Based Research Canada's mission is to address real societal problems through research as a national champion and facilitator for community-based research in campus community engagement in Canada. For 10 years, CBRC has brought together key players of community campus partnerships. Some CBRC founding members continue to be on the CBRC board today. Our network builds capacity for academia and broader community to collaborate and use research as a tool to mobilize community participation in action. We love to hear from you throughout this webinar, so please share your comments and questions in the chat box, which is in the bottom right side of the window, at any time through the presentation. I will share your questions with the presenters during the Q&A period and the last 15 minutes of the webinar. I'm pleased to introduce today's presenters, Dr. Elizabeth Jackson and Sarah Robb. Dr. Elizabeth Jackson is the director of the University of Guelph's Community Engaged Scholarship Institute. Liz provides leadership and strategic direction to the Institute and guides staff members in the development and implementation of all programs. She builds on her research, project management, and teaching expertise in community engaged scholarship, practice-based research, and interdisciplinary approaches to social justice to facilitate mutually beneficial community-university partnerships and foster meaningful engagement between faculty, students, and community. We also have Sarah Robb with us. She is a Senior Support Services Manager for Community Living Stratford and area. She has been in a supervisory role for 15 years, taking on many different areas of support for people with developmental disabilities. Sarah has also worked on various initiatives such as implementing core competencies into the agency, project coordinator for the Development Services HR strategy, and leading the introduction to conscious care and support to staff teams. Sarah is also a part-time professor at Fanshawe College, teaching in the Developmental Services Worker Program. So we're so pleased to have our presenters today, and thank you again for everybody for participating in this webinar, and I'll let Elizabeth and Sarah take it from here.
So hi everyone, we're really happy to be here talking with you about our really amazing collaboration. We thought that we would start off with just a quick overview of the map of our presentation so you can have a sense of what we're getting to. For some reason I'm not able to navigate. Oh, there we are. So we're going to first introduce our organizations and our mandates. We're going to talk about the way this project came to be. We're going to lead you through the process and our respective roles in the collaboration. Talk about our KMB strategy, the ways in which we've begun to share our findings and work toward research impact. We'll talk a bit about enabling and supporting factors at our respective organizations and kind of the characteristics that enabled us to work really well together. And we're going to talk about kind of our hoped for next steps for the research and reflect a little bit on what we have learned. Hope that makes sense. Let me go back a slide. So some of you might know about CESI and some of you might not. So I'm going to give just a really, oh, sorry, it's your turn. I'm terrible. Here, which is the most important part.
We wanted to open with some quotes that came out of the research, and this research is very valuable to the sector that I work in, and it is something that really hasn't been done a whole lot. So we gathered a lot of really interesting information and quotes through this process, and some of it is sometimes hard for us to hear as agencies, and that's okay because we need to learn from it. So just two of the quotes we wanted to sort of open with today and share that came out of this amazing research. So from a transitional age youth that was part of a focus group, he said that staff helped me with things like groceries, budgeting, phone bills, a lot of stuff. I'm afraid if I move out on my own, I have a fiance. If I do move, I'm going to be in debt and lose everything. The youth that we're supporting are afraid of a lot of these things because they haven't been taught the skills in order to really live on their own and survive without the support of staff. And this research really helped to bring that home for our agencies that were a part of it in the words of the youth themselves, which is very important. And then the next quote was from a direct support professional, which is someone who works directly with the people that we support. And what they said was, our connections to other sectors have broadened. We're connecting with sectors we historically haven't needed to connect with. That is a current and emerging practice, a good practice. And frankly, at a systems level, at an upper level, we're getting a lot of pushback around you shouldn't be doing that. Mental health systems should be doing that. And then the youth start falling between the cracks again. This was an important quote for us because it's something that we know, it's something we've talked about at upper levels, but until we actually hear it from the mouths of the people who live this every day and they're supporting people, it really doesn't drive home the same. So just to kind of start off and set the tone for what we're going to talk about, it was very important through this process, through the research, to gather these quotes and really understand what the youth and the direct support professionals are dealing with.
I'm now going backwards. So we thought, having been so nicely introduced by Julia, we spent a little time talking about our organization. So I will start with CESI, the Community Engaged Scholarship Institute. We are housed in the College of Social and Applied Human Sciences at the University of Guelph. And we've been at work for 12 to 15 years, depending how you count. We have had institute status for many years, and our research shop, which is our kind of flagship and oldest program, is 10 years old. So we are a research and teaching support unit based in the College of Social and Applied Human Sciences, as I said, but with a mandate to support capacity development, training, relationship and project brokering across colleges for instructors, students, and crucially also mandated to increase capacity for community engaged practices in our community partners. We have 5 program areas. The first one is our Community Engaged Teaching and Learning program. I happen to know the manager of that program is on this webinar. She's Lindsay Thompson, and she has created a program that really excellently integrates critical community engaged scholarship into course structures so that students are working with their instructors and carrying out community engaged research projects for course credit. I also co-direct with a counterpart from the CAO's office at the City of Guelph, the Guelph Lab, which is a municipal innovation lab based on principles of social innovation, municipal innovation, and community engagement. That lab will do experimental and small-scale research on social issues and community challenges that require municipal levers in order to create impacts or solutions. We have a knowledge mobilization program, and that program has a mandate to support knowledge mobilization, capacity development, and planning across and beyond our college, including planning for research impact with our community partners. It is a very strong program, and it supports faculty grant writing, community capacity development, student capacity development, and more. And that program is one of the CESI programs that was crucial to supporting the Transitional Age Youth Project with Sarah's network. We also have a research shop, as I mentioned, and in the research shop, trained graduate students who have expertise in largely qualitative social science methods and others are trained as engaged scholars and are paid as research assistants to work on collaborative research projects that address community identified research needs. And our final program area is what I call responsive research. So this is a collection of quicker and less mandate-bound projects that respond to emergent community priorities with a little bit more flexibility. And they often look different than projects run through our other programs. The transitional age youth work definitely falls under responsive research. Also in that program, we have a global community engagement specialist who is working to identify and share best practices for engagement across cultural and international distances. And we also have a research associate who has strong expertise and relationships in working on issues of Indigenous food sovereignty. So that's quite a broad program and a very important one for us as we seek to be constantly able to respond. Enough out of me.
So I work for Community Living Stratford and area, and I've worked for them for the past 15 years in a supervisory role, and most recently took on a senior management role, which has been very exciting. And through that, I have become part of this project. I was part of the initial focus groups that were taking place as a manager, and now I have the pleasure of being part of this part of the project as we roll forward. So Community Living, Stratford and area, we are based out of Stratford, and we support people in Perth County, people with developmental disabilities, to live meaningful lives. And that is however it looks for them. So we are very person-centered. Anyone we support in the way that they choose to be supported. That might be living with a roommate, it might be living on their own, it might be having a job, volunteer, social. Each person we support is an individual, and that is how their supports are directed. One of the challenges that has begun to face agencies such as ours, we are funded through the Ministry of Community and Children's Social Services, as are all community living and developmental support agencies. We are, however, standalone agencies, so while we work together and we collaborate, we do operate as our own entities, with the same goal of supporting people with disabilities in the most meaningful way. One of the challenges, though, that we started to face and have been facing is around transitional age youth, and they are defined as a young person with a developmental disability who is aging out of a children's service. So generally that happens anywhere between the ages of 18 and 21, and they will be moving into an adult service providers such as Community Living Stratford and area. As we've started to support more of these youth, and they are coming to the table with these amazing different ways they want to be supported, our agencies have had to figure out how to change and adapt and grow. And it's been very difficult because it's stuff we haven't dealt with before. These youth don't want to live in a group home. They don't want to live with roommates. They want to live on their own. They want to do their own banking. They dabble in drugs and things that it's just all brand new. And this project really drove out of the fact that a lot of agencies are dealing with the same thing. And that's needing to understand better how to support these youth because it's outside of the norm of what we've always done. So back in early 2017, there is a group of directors from various support agencies across the region that they meet every 3 months, and it's really a great time for these directors to get together and talk about issues that are facing their agencies. Most of them are very similar, and a lot of them would center around operations. It might be union stuff, all of that sort of, operational day-to-day stuff that was happening. One of the things that kept coming to the table on a consistent basis, and there didn't seem to be a clear answer as to how do we move forward, was around transitional age youth. I will likely call them TAYs. As an identifier. So this group of directors would get together and they would meet and they would talk about all the challenges they were facing. From that, it was decided that we needed to really get a handle as a sector on what is not working for these youth. Why are we failing them? And not failing them that they weren't being supported in the best way, but how do we listen better? How do we really know that what we're doing is what they want? So a small working group was formed from this group of directors, 4 agencies, which was Community Living Stratford and area, Community Living Guelph, Community Living Cambridge, and Community Living Holy Snap. So 4 directors from those agencies joined together and they started to meet outside of this larger group to talk about what can we really do to figure out how we move forward. And the project was basically formed. So it was decided we needed to do some research. Our sector historically has done our own research into things and come out with our own sort of findings in various areas that we were looking at needing research done on. However, when this project was starting to be talked about, it was quickly realized we are not experts in this area. We are social service providers, and we're very, very good at it, but we're not researchers. We don't necessarily understand what are the right questions to ask. How do you formulate a really good survey? How do you hold focus groups? That's not our forte. Our forte is figuring out from the data and the results, how do we move forward and put together some really good support plans. So in the beginning, we did have a research team that started with us with a small working group, and we did focus groups across the 4 regions that were identified, and there was a focus group for direct support professionals, which is our direct staff, for the TAYs, and as well for the management group. These focus groups were absolutely amazing. The questions were designed by a researcher. They were fabulous, and they really got to the bottom of what we really needed to find out. Unfortunately, the first group that we had partnered with, it didn't work out. So I know Liz is going to talk about this a little bit later, but through some connections, we became connected with CESI in February of 2018. And it was an amazing partnership. And they joined as an academic partner to come on board and really take the research that had been done, all of that data, and help us figure out how do we move it forward and how do we really launch and get the results that we wanted from the research that was done.
Yeah, just to jump in, I love the story of how this collaboration came to us. Typically, our collaborative work comes to us via the really extensive networks that are held by CESI staff members and faculty. And this one kind of went along 6 degrees of separation and popped up, but every single node on that chain was one of deep trust from previous collaborative relationships. So, you know, I was approached by one of the research committee members by someone who had worked with one of the research committee members who used to work with CESI with another prof on campus addressing a totally different community identified research need. This person that knew the research committee member trusted CESI, came to our founding director whose leave I was covering, who bounced it to me. And because there were these really robust, if kind of latent relationships, what happened was that the trust that you needed and that we had not yet built existed via network. And I really like to think about that, because when people ask us, you know, why is this work slow sometimes, or why do you need to go to events and hang out on steering committees and at board meetings, I can say because that's how we build research with impact. So I did want to note that it was a series of trustworthy relationships that led to us being able to just jump right in mid-project and work, I think, really successfully. We get to move on. So I think many of you on this webinar are really interested in how the project worked rather than the research findings, although I have to say the research findings are fantastic, and we'll link to those later again. So as Sarah's already said, the project and the research scoping were driven by the community stakeholders and knowledge holders, not by us as researchers, right, at CESI. I think it's really important to note that, because often many people start their community engaged work with a research interest or question, and then find collaborators to work with. In this case, it did not work that way. It worked the opposite way. And I see that as a huge strength, particularly on a subject that has so many nuances that only an expert knowledge holder could hold. And by expert, I mean practitioner or a person with lived experience, right? So another important thing to note is that in this case, because they had already begun their research in another partnership, and because the research was directed by practitioners rather than academics, I'm making a fake boundary between us for now, just a working boundary. So because it came from staff of service agencies, the data was theirs. And so we were privileged actually to have access to it and to be able to do meaningful and useful analysis for it. And I think it gave a sense of security to know that this was not at all extractive research, right? We were working to uplift work that was already ongoing and to enrich it with our methodological expertise, but we didn't own it, and that was a good feeling. So most of the CESI support for this project came from consultation and planning and knowledge mobilization support from me and from our knowledge mobilization coordinator, Catalin, who is brilliant at her work, and many of you probably also know. So she did quite a lot of work. I did a lot of work in terms of planning how to finish up the analysis. I was able to locate an excellent student, Jess Notwell, who did a really deep dive into the work culture and the relationships and the ministry guidelines before going to the data. So that was excellent research methodologies that we were able to support. And then Carolyn jumped in and did a lot of support to the knowledge mobilization planning, the impact, identifying what impact you wanted to have, what networks you did and did not have access to, and thinking through a strategy. You'll hear a bit more about how that has continued to unfold. So it was mostly in-kind support, as well as some funding toward hiring a student researcher and access to a venue free of charge for an event that was held later on. And then community living provided brains and brilliance, as well as tons of the labor, really. And so that's in terms of funding for the students, for which you were able to support grant, printing costs for some of our outputs, shared costs for time and in-kind support from staff. I'm missing a lot of it. They did a lot. They did a bulk of it, I would say. But we haven't actually done the math and weighed it out, which is probably good practice also. So to say that this was collaborative is genuinely true in this case. It wasn't a matter of, one partner doing it and us being a name only or vice versa. It was definitely deeply collaborative, and we had a lot of sessions where we'd check and be like, who's doing for that? Who's doing that? What's happening? What do we need? And I think, again, because of the trust and the clarity of communication, we were able to overcome many potential challenges and work around them.
One of the most exciting things that happened during this process, and Carolyn helped us so much through this process, was in November of 2019, on November 18th, we were able to launch our final product of the research, and it was a very exciting day for all of us. This had been an over 2-year process, almost 3 years, by the time we got to November 18th, 2019. And it had, of course, its frustrating moments, but it really was an amazing experience for all of us that were involved. Again, because of the collaboration, because the teams that we were working with, Carolyn and Liz and Jess, and even our previous researcher, Ash, they were just so amazing to work with, and they were so guiding, and they gave us the information that we wouldn't have had to be able to move this forward. Carolyn sat with us for a couple hours and helped us put together a plan for this launch. And, without her help, we wouldn't have known who to get to the table, who's the most important people to come to that table to hear the results. What do we want? What's the impact? When they leave the room, what do we want them to know? How do we want them to leave the room thinking, we've got to move this forward, and how do we do it? We initially thought this launch was going to be a big launch, that we were going to invite agencies and ministry people and all sorts of people within our sector to come and hear the findings. But Carolyn quickly helped us realize that that wasn't what we needed for this first launch. We needed the decision makers, the policy makers, the people in the ministry level to be there to grab hold of this research. Our hope is that there will be a phase 2. The research that we did gave us a lot of information and findings to show where the gaps are for the people that we're supporting for the transitional age youth. We can really see it, and it came out of their mouths. And this is the first time in our sector that this kind of research has really been done, where the results were driven by the people that are receiving the services. They were asked the questions, and they were given the opportunity to say what's working and what's not working. So it was really important at this launch that the people who can make the decision on phase 2 and make the decision on the recommendations were in the room. And without Carolyn's support, we may not have been able to sort of hone that group down as finely as we did. And the launch was very successful. We were quite happy. Jess did an amazing presentation on the findings. She was so connected to it, and it came through so passionately in that presentation. It was really, really amazing. She talked as passionately as I would about the youth and the results and what needs to happen for them moving forward and why phase 2 is so important. So it was really important for us planning this launch to do it correctly, to make sure that we had the right people at the table, and Carolyn helped us get there. And we're forever thankful for that, because it really was a successful event.
It really was beautiful. So, as I said before, we decided not to kind of dive deeply into the thematic analysis and the results of our research, although they are really fascinating and I think will be impactful. We're going to kind of stay back on process and logistics. So we just wanted to share that through the series of interviews and focus groups that Sarah's described with managers, direct support professionals, and transitional aged youth, a huge amount of data was gathered, which our student researcher went through very carefully. We all consulted, so there was a group process of kind of clarifying the theming processes and identifying points of tension or where we needed clarification. So it was quite a collaborative process in terms of the analysis. And then again, a collaborative process of designing the knowledge mobilization strategy, which led to a decision to make 2 targeted briefs. One, an education brief for practitioners, direct support professionals, and community members, I would say, and the other one, a policy brief aimed more directly at people with policy impact or roles that could affect higher level conditions in which we're doing our work. And we also created infographics to accompany each piece. You can see them on the screen there, and these are all available on the CESI website. So if you want to see them, we've got a link at the end. You can have a closer look. But we targeted those to each particular organization's community context because, as you'll recall, Sarah pointed out, each community living org or other service org has its own mandate, services, and context to navigate. So it did seem important to tweak those just the tiniest little bit so that potential knowledge users in those communities would feel directly connected to the work. Do you want to say anything else?
Well, and we had some great discussions even around that, whether we do one set of infographics that all of us would use with one contact person in one region. And again, through the help of CESI, it was very clear that that's not going to be the most impactful for what we're looking for, because we do all support in our regions and we have our own contact people with the ministry, within other agencies, within other partners within our regions. So it was important that on the infographics, they could be customized to each region so that there is a contact that is known that someone could go to for more information. And again, we would have gone probably with one standard one, which would have worked and been fine. But through the help of CESI, we quickly saw that that wasn't going to be the most effective. And we have all this amazing information. We want it to be effective. We want it to get into the right hands. And we want people to know who to follow up with.
So again, it talks about it's a relationship, right? Mm-hmm. So we knew that knowledge mobilization is a relational process. It's not a transactional or output only process. So we tried to weave those principles into the whole process and into the outputs.
And something that was very important for us from this process is that this research doesn't just sit on someone's desk. So now that we have it, it's amazing. We've got all these quotes and we know where we need to go. We don't want these to just be sitting on someone's desk. So we want people to know where do they go to start help us mobilize what phase 2 looks like. And that's again why it was so important that some of these pieces were customized so that in various regions they know who to reach out to ask those questions.
So we've been trying to anticipate potential questions from viewers or participants. So now we're going to talk a little bit about enabling and supporting factors that we've identified as having been crucial to this working. So institutionally or organizationally speaking, I think I can't stress enough how fortunate we are at CESI to have a strong mandate to support exactly this kind of work and to support the development of new community engaged scholars in service of community identified research priorities. We're abundantly supported and well-resourced in that work, and I think it makes a huge difference when something arises out of the blue that wasn't planned for and we're able to pivot and say yes. So we have a really strong institutional mandate and commitment to community engagement, and I'm very grateful for that. We also, by virtue of some careful allocation, had enough wiggle room in our student budget to be able to hire Jess to support the work. And that's not to be understated, particularly in times like these. We also have strongly trained students via CESI's own training and also via many faculty members who have strong expertise in and experience with community engaged scholarship. So in this case, it was yet another relationship word of mouth process that brought this excellently trained social science researcher into the group who was able to more than step up to the task. And then finally, anyone who knows me know I say this all the time, but at CESI, we are fortunate to have excellently skilled staff with really deep and ongoing learning in their fields of practice. And I think knowing that we had people in-house with expertise, experience, and mandate to support this work made it very easy for me to confidently commit to supporting this work.
And similarly on our side, we had to have a lot of the same factors. We are funded through the ministry, and we don't have a lot of additional funding to be able to carry out these sorts of projects. So we had to look outside of the agency for some grants. to be able to do this, which we were successful at. And the 4 agencies that came together as a working group to really drive this forward also made a commitment to find some dollars within their budget to be able to support this. And that's a huge thing when, you know, we get a certain budget we have to work within. But this was seen as something that was very valuable for down the road, to be able to really understand why we're doing things the way we're doing and what we need to change. So we had to be very creative around our funding, but it was well worth it to figure out a way in order for this to happen. And we also had to have a lot of support from within our agencies, within the 4 agencies, as well as within that larger director group. They were behind us the whole time, rooting for us to get this done, and what is it going to look like, and what does phase 2 look like. And those conversations are still ongoing because there's so much support for really figuring out the changes we need to make to the supports we're offering to the transitional age youth. So support was not a problem. We had a lot of it across the regions that we were meeting around. And when it came time to do the focus groups, that was another area we had to really look at who was going to be at the table to really get the best and most useful information for the research. So who were the staff? Who were the frontline staff that were working every day with the transitional age youth and could really speak to what's happening and where are the gaps? And then who were the transitional age youth we needed at the table? And we had a lot. They were willing to come to the table and speak their minds. And the researchers that was working with them at the time just had such an act to get people talking and to share their stories and their experiences. And that's really what we needed. This qualitative information that we gathered was just so valuable to see where are the gaps, where are these youth falling through the cracks, what is happening out in our sector, and what do we need to do a little bit differently. So again, we had to look at who are the right people to come to the table and be able to offer that information, and the research shows we found the right people.
And then shifting gears from systemic factors to more kind of character or qualities. That can able to work.
So again, for us too, because this is something that we don't do a lot of, like I've mentioned earlier, research is something that has been done in our sector, but it's not been done to the scale that this project was. But we really had to have a lot of trust and collaboration and working relationships among the 4 agencies. It was very important that we worked very closely and that we all had the same goal of what we wanted from the research. And that really wasn't questioned from the beginning. Everybody came to the table with the same thought. And the bottom line was, we have to figure out what we're doing. What are we not doing right? And what are we doing right? What do we continue doing? So the goal was always the same. But we had to make sure we were building that trust and the collaboration, and that we all had an equal say in what was going to happen as we moved forward among the agencies that were part of this. And then we also had to have those same trust and collaboration relationships with CESI. It was very important that the people we were working with understood who we are, understood what it is that we wanted from this research, and we fully trusted that they did. Every time we met, it was clear that they gravitated to this research as much as we did, and they really understood as a sector what we were looking for and what we needed to push this forward. So that was a really amazing, for us, for people who don't do a lot of research, it was really quite fascinating to see people outside of social services really grasp onto this and own it as well. It was really great. It
was a beautiful thing.
It really was.
Really
yeah.
Special, yeah.
And I think too, part of what we needed, because this was a process we weren't necessarily used to, was we needed flexibility, and we needed to be able to say, we want to do it this way. Oh, maybe that's not actually going to work. Can we do it this way? And we needed people to be on board with us to roll with that flexibility. And again, CESI was amazing with that. You know, when we would sort of go off into our social work world and talk about things, Carolyn and Liz and Jess would very quickly pull us back to, okay, but what is the goal? What are you really trying to do here? What do you really want out of this? And they kept us focused on that, which was very important. But also we're very flexible, that if we needed to explore another avenue, they helped us go down that road, which was great.
So other factors that enabled us, touched on flexibility, so I'm going to leave that alone. But I will note that, and I think I see a question popping up about accessing resources, so maybe we'll come to that in more detail later. But in this particular collaboration, we were enabled by the fact that Community Living had sought and received funding from Sunbeam to support the research. CESI was able to sort of match or contribute to that, so that and then, as you said already, the community living agencies were able to allocate portions of their budgets as well. So it wasn't quite as patchwork as these things often feel, I will say. We were quite enabled by financial resources. And I will just say that something that enabled this as well was that the community partners in the room had a genuine, frank curiosity about their own practices. There wasn't ego in the room. There was care for the question and for the impacts of your work. And I think that that's, as community engagement professionals or practitioners, I work all the time to stay curious and to stay humble, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I felt that we were all doing that around the table in a really productive way. So we have expertise on certain methodologies and practices. You have tons of expertise on your organizations and your practices and their impacts. What we brought together was a willingness to each be wrongish and rightish and find what was right for this particular collaboration. And that is that's a skill set that really, I think, is under-recognized as being of value: humility and flexibility and trust in one another's knowledge.
And I think that's very important too, to note that we definitely did know that some of the stuff coming out of this research was going to be hard to hear. And we had to leave our egos at the door, because the sole purpose of this research was to figure out what are we not doing and the best way for the transitional age youth, where are the gaps? And we had to be open to hearing all of that and to really taking a look at our sector and what needs to be sort of fine-tuned in order to be offering the best supports. So we did talk about that a lot too, that the research findings are not going to be easy to hear, but we need to hear them. It's very important that it's coming out of the mouths of the people that need to share their information, and we have to be ready for what's coming.
So we have 2 more slides. I think we're going to try to pick up the pace a little bit, because I think people are starting to want to raise their own voices, which is fair enough. So impacts and next steps.
So we've had some amazing things come out of this research so far. Again, our bottom line goal is we would like to look at a phase 2, and that is to do a more province-wide research project, perhaps, to really take a look at, outside of the agencies that were part of this first phase, what else is going on sector-wide within the province. So we have been able to share this information. The 4 agencies as well, working group as well, have taken the briefs and met with their ministry reps. They've met at various planning tables within their region to share the information, to talk about the recommendations, and to start to garner some support for a phase 2 and what that looks like. Myself and my executive director, we met with our local MPP and shared the findings, and he actually shared it with the Minister of Community and Children and Social Services, who then responded that he had read it. And that is absolutely a phenomenal thing for us, is that it got into the hands of someone that we wanted it to get to. We're not sure yet what phase 2 is going to look like, but there is still lots of support and push out there that we need to take it forward. And we will be looking at another collaboration like this, because it worked so well. And we learned so much, but we're not the experts in this sort of work. We need support from people that are. So phase 2 we will be reaching out again, whatever that looks like, for some support to be able to move this forward a little bit more. But the results have been so far great. The findings have been shared around. People are talking about it. People are contacting us to go and present. I actually just got asked again to go present at a staff training, which is phenomenal, to talk about the results. So as much as we can share it, we are, to be able to figure out what the next step looks like, and how do we really start to push the government to look at things a little bit differently.
I hadn't anticipated this, but here's a shout out to anyone who knows a researcher or an awesome student or would have interest in joining a broader collaboration. It feels like you know, I'm sure Sarah and I would love to talk with you.
Sure would.
That was cleverly done. So a final slide, we thought we'd spend a little time reflecting on our learning. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by the chat thread because I always find it so interesting in there, but I'm going to just pause and trust Julia. So in terms of our learning from this process, I think you can hear from how we're both speaking that we're still reflecting on it. Something that happens to me because of the kind of level at which I work is that I often need to get my fingers into something, you know. So I supervise excellent staff who are all over the place, and I spend a lot of time at a slightly not detached, but a disengaged level. So for me, it was a genuine gift to be much more deeply engaged in partnership for a longer time. So thank you for that. And I think I just continue to learn that the almost rote responses about what matters in community engagement, relationship, trust, collaboration, time, that's true, and it's not a cliche. So my first learning is trust yourself to know those things. And then, but the attendant learning is that we have more impact when we honor those principles, right? And we know this to be true, but hearing from Sarah and her colleagues and looking around the room as these ministry reps are kind of taking in the research findings and hearing things that they don't have time to hear, but need to know to make informed decisions, that was a really thrilling thing to see. I think we all exist to do work with impact, and it felt like, oh, it's happening. Again, it reaffirmed for me the importance of being humble and flexible and genuinely collaborative, and to being led by community identified priorities. It's not to me to tell you what to care about. It's to me to become an accomplice to the work and to support it through the resources and skills that I am able to leverage. And I think that it never hurts to learn that over and over. Mm-hmm. So then, yeah, that's my second bullet here, leveraging our respective resources and skills and knowledges for greatest impact. That continues to be the best way to work in this kind of field. And then again, I've said this a few times, but it reaffirms for me the power and the kind of capacity that lies in working, what you've called working knowledge. So like practitioner, expert, person with lived experience, knowledge. It enriched everything to have voices in the room and in our heads and at the table throughout the process, including the transitional aged youth, by the way. They were a key part of the research. That makes such a difference, you know, and I really value the fact that we were able to all weave our voices together and our skills.
And from our perspective as the agencies that were involved, it was absolutely amazing, which I said earlier, to see the academic side of this process come together with us as sort of the working experts in the field and do such an amazing job to collaborate and pool our resources and get the output that we did. There are likely a lot of agencies, such as mine, such as the ones that I'm working with, that would see such value in working with universities and colleges and research organizations to do this kind of work with us. Because like I said earlier, we're not the experts in research. It's not something that we do on a daily basis. We're on the ground, we're supporting people, and that's where our expertise lie. We knew what we wanted out of this process, but we didn't know how to get there. And to be able to collaborate with CESI was just such an amazing partnership, because they helped us walk that path. And we're in social services. We are always collaborating across our agencies and trying to find the best ways to do things. But to be able to reach outside of that network and build these relationships and collaborations was such an enormous step forward for us, because the results we got, we wouldn't have got without. We would have done our own focus groups with our own questions that probably wouldn't have got to the bottom of what we really were looking for, because we're not skilled in putting those together. So it was an amazing process for us to see as well that we can have these partnerships in our community and rely on people that have the skills to do those things to really get us where we wanted to go. So that would be my encouraging point to people that are listening today, is that there's likely a lot of agencies like mine that if you reached out to would collaborate, probably have a need to do research and don't know how to do it and don't know where to start. But it's amazing, it is amazing to come together and bring the skills together and see what you can do.
I think that's us. If you're still curious, I know there are questions in line, but please feel free to contact either of us, check out our organizations, and please do visit the web link at the very bottom there and have a look at our outputs. Good?
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth and Sarah, for just such a wonderful webinar, and it was incredibly informative. I'm sure everybody here feels the same way, and I can want to just first say that this webinar is being recorded, and you can find the webinar recording by next week on communityresearchcanada.ca/webinars. Now I want to launch right into our Q&A section. So a couple of questions coming in. I want to start with one from Juan, and he was asking about access to government funding. For community-based research, it's always challenging to find government funding. I wonder what main lessons do you have about applying for funding following the community process?
I can answer first. So as someone working in an academic institution, I don't know where you're located, so this might be different, but so I think that probably the best, quick-ish grant in existence right now is probably the Social Science and Humanities Research Council's Partnership Engage grants. We haven't yet talked about going for one, but those are small, single project grants intended to support one academic partner and one community partner. You're like, to address research that will enable policy change at that one organization. So I would say look at the PEG grants if you're able to access or leverage academic funding. I don't know for sure how well staff practitioners are doing at getting those, and I'm staff, not faculty. So when I have these conversations with people about PEGs, my advice is to see if there's a faculty player in the mix who would be willing to serve as PI or principal investigator on one of those. Of course, there are ways also, I think, to stitch collaborative community-engaged research into the bigger SSHRC and NSERC grants as case studies in a bigger umbrella research practice. Those require a longer-term relationship and commitment. I think CIHR funding has historically been excellent at funding community-engaged work. So that's the academic side, and maybe I'll yield to you on the kind of community accessible
funds.
And
lots of communities have their own sort of community access grants and funding bodies that you can reach out to. We have a couple in Stratford, Community Foundations being one of them. We've actually accessed Trillium for various projects as well in the past. In this particular case, we were able to get a grant from a like organization to us. They're called Sunbeam. They had some funds that they were able to grant to us to be part of this process. And then, like I said, the 4 agencies that were part of the small working group just carved out some money to be able to make this research happen. And we didn't have to look too far outside of that, but there are lots of community grants that you can access for this kind of work as well. It's just doing research into whatever that specific community is to be able to see what they have to offer.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's really helpful feedback, I'm sure, for people. And I just want to also add that Joanna's typed in a message that MHCC funding is up to 12 years for projects, $50,000 per year or $100,000 per project for community-based research on cannabis and mental health, and the deadline is Thursday, April 23rd, 2020. So that's kind of something relevant if any of you are doing that kind of research as well. Yeah, there's a couple more questions here. So I have one from Melissa. For a project with findings that apply to so many cross-sector partners, child welfare, adult development, healthcare, mental health services, what have been the challenges and successes in sharing the results across the sector, having important conversations about the research and collaborating going forward to support youth transitioning?
Such a bang-on question. I think maybe you can take that
one. Yeah. So certainly there have been a lot of successes. Like I talked about, we have been invited to lots of planning tables, and planning tables are really in various regions across the province. you would get a lot of executive directors and ministry people that they meet generally quarterly, sometimes a little more frequently than that, and they come to the table and they talk about their region and factors that are being faced at that time. And so our working group has been invited to present the findings at various tables so far, which has been absolutely amazing. We have also shared it, like I said, in our regions with our ministry reps. So we've met individually with them, as well as we've met, they've come to certain presentations, so they've gotten copies of it. We've met with our MPs and our MPPs to share the information, to try and drive it forward. And that's really a lot of what we've done in the developmental sector on the adult side of things. It is slowly being shared as well with the children's side of developmental services. However, we're trying to be very careful about how that's shared, because it is information, like I said earlier, that's hard to hear. And we want to make sure that whoever gets this information understands the context behind it, and that it is important to hear the information, but it's not a criticism. We're not saying one service is better than the other. We're just saying that things need shift, and we all need to shift. And what does that look like? So it's slowly happening. There have been some challenges because of timing of when this all came out over Christmas, and it's winter and it's harder to sort of get around to these things, but it's slowly being shared and moved across sectors. We have also talked about mental health and how do we appropriately share it there, but it still is being discussed, because some of the information is sensitive. And again, we want to make sure that when it is shared, it is done in the most appropriate way, so that nobody feels that we're slighting them with the research, because that's not the intention. It's for all of us to take a look at what we're doing and maybe what we need to do a little differently. So we're still meeting as a small working group to talk about how we're sharing these things and how to continue to push it forward, with that end goal of what does phase 2 look like, and how do we bring those other partners into it. Police departments is another one we've talked about. We deal on a regular basis in our communities with the police around the transitional age youth. So how do we bring them on board to really understand who these young people are and what they're facing? That, not that they need to be treated differently, but certainly there's some factors that, police departments need to know about. So lots of discussions still happening. It's been a long process, but it still feels like it's really early in how we're sharing this and moving forward.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear about the different ways that you're sharing it and how sensitive you are to thinking about, and just hearing about how what you're thinking about in terms of sharing it and your approach to doing that. So thank you for sharing that as well. And definitely another thing we would love to, when we put the webinar recording up, is to have a link to your resource there as well. That would be wonderful. So we have another question here from Lindsay Thompson. So she says, it's a wonderful partnership. Thank you for sharing this webinar. My question is whether there is a meaningful role to play for CESI and others on the university side of things in further implementing the research that has been completed. It sounds like the products are well tailored and the knowledge created is already being shared with other staff. I just often wonder if there is more we can do here to support further knowledge about globalization with government, policymakers, and so on.
We'll take anything you can give us. We would be thrilled to continue any sort of partnership that we can, to continue collaborating. And if it's with CESI, yeah, that's even better, because, again, I can't speak enough to the fact of, to be in our shoes and know what this information is and know the sector and understand what's happening out there, to have an outside perspectives come in and really get it and really sort of take hold of it as if it, they're part of the sector too, was absolutely amazing. So to continue that through phase 2 would be awesome.
Yeah, it's a great question, Lindsay, and it's one that we, as you know, that we keep discussing internally in terms of mandate and where we stop or don't stop, right? And so in this case, I feel like the easiest, quickest way to continue doing our work is to commit to doing the kind of thing Sarah's doing here together with me in other contexts where I wouldn't usually venture, that kind of thing. So supporting, presenting to key groups of stakeholders. I think for sure continuing to support knowledge mobilization planning, because this is collaborative research that we also want to keep moving through the world. But I feel like you're asking a much deeper question, and I'm totally open to thinking about it, because I think, you know, as university located staff members, a lot of people think that our responsibility ends when a student graduates, when a project is published, you know, when a phase is stitched, closed. And definitely in this case, we're not seeing this as, well, great knowing you, all the best with changing the world for your transitional age youth. It's more like, this was phase one. It continues to be needed, and it continues to need to move through the world. And I think we do see ourselves as partners on that journey rather than someone who flew in and helped for a bit. I'd be interested to know if that answered Lindsay's question.
Yeah, Lindsay, please type in. And it did. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, wonderful. And just it's just amazing to hear about the work that you've done together and how you come together with your different skill sets and negotiated that and really listen to each other to kind of make this research as useful and in the right hands to actually see the change that's happening. And I'm curious, what's other ways that you think on the community organization side, you know, how can other community organizations like yours further be supported to, and you know, do this kind of research and reach out to organizations like CESI? Yeah, how can we help more of this type of community-based, community-driven, and action-oriented research happen?
Well, I certainly know from my perspective that when, you know, I meet a lot within my own sector, but I'm also part of other committees outside of our sector, that when these conversations come up, I will be talking about this because, again, we do our day-to-day job, but we're not an expert in how to carry these things out. And there's so much information that we need to gather and research that needs to be done around things that, like I said earlier, we've certainly carried out surveys within our agencies and we've done cross-sector surveys around things, but we're not the experts in understanding what do we really need, how do we phrase questions, how do we do all of those sorts of things. And I think it's very important, again, as we leave today, to understand that agencies such as mine have a need for these kinds of things, and we don't always know who to reach out to, and being able to tap into our networks has been amazing. The way this all came about was so organic and natural because of networks that had already been formed. So, you know, I would encourage people to reach out that way. If you're looking to do projects or you have students who are looking for things to do, social service and community agencies, I know, would be more than willing to talk about what their need is and what does that look like and how do they work together.
Yeah,
Say one thing?
Absolutely.
I see the time, so I'll be clear. But those of us who work in or adjacent to university environments are familiar with the current provincial mandate toward experiential learning. So they're framing experiential learning as a career readiness process, which may not be at the very heart of why we believe we do what we do. But in fact, here at CESI, we found that the ways in which we do our best practices anyway align very closely with the kind of ministry checklist for experiential learning. So rather than seeing that as a constraint, I see it as an opportunity to weave community engaged work into more places and programs in the university, which will ideally have the result of enabling agencies to access more academic resources without additional cost. So every college and university student now has to have at least one experiential learning experience, you know what I mean? Experiential learning opportunity throughout their degree. So this could either be a nightmare or it could be an opportunity for us as staff or facilitators or community-based researchers or people working in the nonprofit and social services sectors to come together and find clever ways to mobilize that as a resource, as well as all the other factors that we've talked about.
That's brilliant. And I'm so glad you brought that up. And I think that's a really clever way to think about, you know, how to kind of mobilize our academic institutions to further support communities. So I love it. And I guess we'll have to end here, unfortunately. I'm going to just wanted to share again Sarah and Elizabeth's email addresses, because they're kindly offering to continue to be able to support questions that our audience has if you want, and if perhaps you want to be involved in conversations about what a phase 2 may look like, because that would be really exciting to keep this going. So I think, certainly reach out. I think that would be really exciting to see this webinar as a piece of helping this really important work continue to grow and thrive. I wanted to again thank you, Elizabeth and Sarah, for their wonderful webinar and sharing their research and collaboration together. It was incredibly valuable insight from you. We also have other ways that you can get involved with CBRC. You can become a CBRC member as an institution, organization, individual, faculty, or student. Continue to join CBRC webinars such as this with these wonderful experts in the field. So we try to bring together really case studies and insights and people actually doing this practical work. So stay tuned for more in this room. And also join our newsletter at info@communityresearchcanada.ca, and you can also join through our website to continue to engage in webinars and events and learnings. And as well as we have our CTU Expo coming up in May 2020 in Sault Ste. Marie. We have a short little feedback form. If you could take 2 minutes to quickly share your feedback on this webinar. After you log out, the webinar feedback form will just automatically fill up, and we greatly appreciate your feedback so we can continue to provide relevant and quality community-based research webinars for you. Thank you again so much, Sarah and Elizabeth, for this wonderful presentation and webinar. We so appreciate you sharing this with us. And thank you to everybody that participated in the webinar as well, and your wonderful questions. Please stay tuned for upcoming webinars, events, and programs from CBRC by joining communityresearchcanada.ca and by signing up for our CBRC